Wales' Audit and Assurance Committee meeting. We welcome also Carwyn Lloyd-Jones, Chief Cloud Officer, will be attending to respond to questions on item 4.21, Mission 1 Cloud Services. To Samantha Morgan, who will be joining us as Director of People and OD. She's recently taken up this role and will be responding to questions on item 4.22, Mission 5 on Staff Development. A welcome to Nathan Couch and Michael Whiteley from Audit Wales, who will be presenting the Audit Wales Committee update and annual audit report. And welcome also to Thomas Jones, newly appointed as Senior Auditor at Audit Wales, who's attending to observe. And finally, a welcome to Stephen Cheney and David Butler from NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership. As usual, we are holding this meeting virtually via MS Teams. It is being recorded and the recording will be posted on DHCW's website in due course. And as usual, today's committee meeting papers are also publicly accessible on the website. We have a full agenda, as you can see, and we are planning to finish today's public session by 12:15 at the latest. We'll have a short break then before the private session, which is scheduled to start at 12:25. We'll also have a 10-minute comfort break, probably between sections 4 and 5 of today's agenda. So let's turn to apologies for absence, and we have apologies from Julie Francis and Michelle Sell. On to declarations of interest. I've not been notified in advance of any declarations, but if committee members have any to declare in relation to anything on today's agenda, could you please do so now? I can't see any response, so in that case, let's move us on to section 2 of the agenda. And this is the consent agenda. And to ensure that we are focusing appropriately on business critical activity, we will be using the consent agenda. There are a number of our year-end reports on today's agenda, and we discussed and agreed at the agenda setting meeting that it would be appropriate to include these within the consent agenda. Now, I'm assuming that you all had an opportunity to read these papers. Can I just check whether there's anything on this part of the agenda that you would want to move to the main agenda for greater discussion? I can't see any hands up, so I'll assume that therefore we propose that colleagues are happy to approve and note all the items within the consent agenda. And let me take you through them then. Specifically, we are approving the minutes, item 2.1, from committee meetings held on October the 15th, 2024, both public and private abridged minutes. We are noting the NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership Committee Assurance Report, item 2.2. We are noting the contents of the Forward Work Plan, item 2.3, including items scheduled to come to future committee meetings. We are noting the Standards of Behaviour Report, item 2.4, and it is pleasing to note the current compliance rate on declarations of 98% for staff banded 8A+, and 37% for the rest of the organisation, which is also good progress. We are noting the Welsh Health Circular Report, item 2.5, and noting the Audit and Assurance Committee Annual Report, item 2.6. We are noting also the Audit and Assurance Committee Effectiveness Self-Assessment, item 2.7. And thank you, colleagues, for completing the survey. It is heartening to see positive feedback on the committee's effectiveness and specifically how we have further matured over the last 12 months. We shall be approving then the Audit and Assurance Committee Terms of Reference, item 2.8, with some very minor amendments, and finally approving the Audit and Assurance Committee Cycle of Business, item 2.9. So let us move us on then to the main agenda, which is section 3. And we'll start with the action log. You'll see from this paper that there were 3 actions captured from our committee meeting held on October the 15th, which I'm pleased to note are all complete. And we are being asked to note the status of the action log, which we do. And then that brings us to part 4 of today's committee meeting, which is the section on audit and counter fraud. Let's start then with agenda item 4.1, which is the internal audit progress report. And I'll now hand over to Stephen Cheney to go through the internal progress report. And Stephen, you were joined by David Cutler for the third of our audit reports before us today. So, Croeso, Stephen, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. We are making very good progress with our remaining audits for 24-25. We have several works to move on to, which will bring us to the conclusion of our plan for this year. Since the papers were issued, we have finalised 2 additional pieces of work, or very close to finalising those pieces of work. So we continue to make good progress there. We've also commenced our planning for 25-26, which we'll be looking to produce a draft plan for sharing in the very near future. So no issues to highlight from the progress report itself. There's detail within the appendix of the status of the reports completed and the current work in progress. But at this committee, we do have 3 audit reports that have been finalised, one of which is Mission 1 Cloud Services. Now, normally I would be joined by my colleague Martin, but due to a conflict and the positive assurance rating for this, we caught up separately, and I provided, so I have a summary to provide of the detail. As I said, overall it was substantial assurance. We found a good, clear cloud strategy in place. There's a business case and a delivery plan for implementation of the strategy as well. Found some upwards reporting to the executives, but as part of the IMTP process, however, limited reporting on the strategy progress. So we've raised a recommendation around this. We also found risks included within the risk management, or as part of the risk management process. So we were confident that risks were being managed suitably. We did find a gap around risk management for the potential lack of funding for the strategy going forward, and we raised recommendation around that. But in general, a very good approach to implementing the strategy. It was on track, funded, but just tightening up some of the controls for any future pitfalls. We also found a skills matrix in place. Upskilling is taking place throughout the organisation as well, and we confirmed that we felt the necessary skills are currently in place to implement the strategy as well. We also found the cloud environment to be appropriately established with security and data control arrangements, and the business case proposal for the cloud migration is for a hybrid approach that uses rehosting with optimization. However, there is a response from the client to, where appropriate to do so, consider other solutions going forward in response to our recommendation around this. However, overall, there's nothing significant from our perspective to flag up. There's good progress being made, and we expect it to continue that way. So we'd welcome any questions or further input.
Thank you, Stephen. That's very helpful indeed. I'll turn then to Alistair to start the questioning, followed by Ruth. Diolch.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stephen. Good to see the summary. Question around cloud and the relationship between the demands that cloud services that we're increasingly increasingly becoming a central part of our operations, and their demands for energy in the data centers that they inevitably have, and the links with that and our energy management and our carbon footprint management. Have you looked at whatever change that might be? Is that regarded as a secondary change, and therefore it doesn't come into our bailiwick? Do we still have to draw conclusions around that?
Well, as part of this review, that wasn't a consideration or a direct consideration as such, but we have looked at more broadly as well, including data centers. So some work has been completed in recent years, and I would strongly suspect this will continue to be an area that we focus on going forward for a couple of different reasons. But it's a very fair point. It wasn't picked up within this review directly, but Carwyn may be able to assist.
Thank you, Chrysler Cadwyn. Would you like to come in on that point now and perhaps respond more widely to the introduction and to the audit report that Stephen's outlined today?
Yeah, diolch yn fawr. Yes, I already caught the tail end of that bit of the introduction, but yes, obviously I've seen the report and it's very positive. So it's really good. From the carbon footprint perspective, we've considered that in the business case that we've put together for Welsh Government. So and essentially, yes, cloud data centers do consume an awful lot of energy, but they are more environmentally friendly or more carbon efficient, or however you want to describe it, than operating stuff in your own data centers on the whole, right? So one of our data centers is very good. It's got fresh air cooling almost all of the year, and then we and with evaporative cooling in the mix as well. And then when it gets particularly hot, we've got sort of traditional air conditioning cooling going on. But that is a bit of the exception rather than the rule. The other data center, the larger of the two, the kind of the one in data center 2, sorry, I'm just conscious I'm not meant to say where it is not as energy efficient as the first one for us. So we've considered the carbon implications in the business case. So usefully from the cloud providers, they'll give you pretty accurate indication of how much carbon CO2e, the carbon dioxide equivalent that you are using in the data centers. And then because we know how much power and stuff we're putting into the existing data centers, how much we're getting billed for electricity and things, we've been able to draw some comparisons. So yeah, it is absolutely part of our decarbonisation plan for DHCW. So yeah.
Thank you, Cadwyn. Diolch. And Ruth, your turn next.
Diolch, Marion. This is possibly a question for Chris. Heads up, Chris. I was really pleased to see the findings actually on the cloud strategy, and I want to talk about the governance related point, particularly considering the conversation we had at last audit committee where we were talking about getting the right reporting up to the right levels through some of our programs, particularly in operations when we're talking about the changes that are happening there. So I just wonder, is there something else that we need to consider about how things get onto the reporting for the program delivery committee? Because we shouldn't really have had to wait for an audit to come along to tell us that we should be looking at the cloud strategy at program delivery committee necessarily. So I just wonder how we close that gap to make sure we've got the right level of information coming up to the right committees. Diolch.
Thank you. Who wants to respond? I think I'll turn to Claire then, please.
So Ruth's got a fair point, and we've been looking at that alongside the performance reporting in terms of from an operational perspective, because what we don't want to do is clog up the program committee with a lot of operationally linked deliverables which lend themselves to an operational oversight group. So at the moment, they go to our management board and we review them there. So there's two parts to this. One is from an operational perspective, we are looking at, for example, a number of initiatives we've got, of which cloud is one of them, such as the simplifying our license and our architecture and the operational stages to do that through our integration hub. Those are very much operational based delivery plans, and therefore we want oversight of those as part alongside the operational performance. So Sam Lloyd alongside Dominica, our new service management lead, and also Chris Morton, who's here today, they've got a group looking at what should that look like, and how does that link in then to not only our management board but our governance structure. So I think it's about getting the right balance, if I'm honest, Ruth, in terms of what is a strategic program, and you could argue that cloud does lend itself to that. So what's the decision point of where it fits, what's the oversight, and how do we get the right decisions and the right oversight in the right place. So I agree. I think the audit findings help that. They highlight that sort of blind spot, but we are looking at that alongside the operations new structure and the new reporting lines to really sharpen that bit up in terms of oversight and grip and control, really.
Thank you, Claire. Carwyn.
Yeah, diolch. I was just going to say, there is not a formula as such, but there's a scoring process for deciding what makes it on to the PDC for oversight of the POMB. So we'd actually made the decision before we got the audit finding that it needed to go up there. And that was based on basically the business case being approved by the board and therefore being submitted into Welsh Government. That was the trigger, really. So now we have a programme that was good for the PDC to have oversight of. So it's just to say that, really, that it's not this that triggered it. We'd actually made the decision beforehand. It's just that the things that were happening in parallel. So
that's helpful clarification. Thank you, Carwyn.
Yeah, Carwyn, and good to know that you've had the foresight to foresee this and to take steps to address it. Chris, Board Secretary, Chris Darling.
Diolch, Marion. And yeah, just to respond to Ruth's point, because I think it is a really good point. When the programme's delivery was established, there was a fair bit of discussion and debate around the scope of the programmes that should be reported through to that committee. Initially, it was agreed there would be what we would describe as the programmes we host on behalf of NHS Wales. So we have a leadership role, but generally we work in partnership with other NHS bodies to deliver those programmes. So most of our what I would define as internal programmes, cloud, API, Fiorano, we've got a number. We don't report through to that committee. That's not to say we couldn't in the future. That's to say initially we defined major programmes as the 12 external facing programmes, but we did say the terms of reference, particularly around that point, because we had a development session on that, would be reviewed minimum of once a year. Because I think the point, is well made. Our portfolio is made up of internal and external programmes. Because that committee focuses on external only at the moment, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right thing. So I think it's a good challenge and something at the next programmes delivery committee in a couple of weeks, we've got the terms of reference as part of the 12 months review. So probably worth picking up that point then.
And I think if the scoring matrix largely works, then that's great, and there might be exceptions, then that's fine. But we just need to explicitly call that out if that's the case. So it'll be helpful to have that conversation at PDC in whenever it is, a few weeks' time. Diolch.
Perhaps worth just adding, we held an informal discussion on the draft audit plan for next year, and now that we are well over 12 months into the programme delivery committee establishment, it's one of the areas that we are considering taking a deeper look at next year. So we may well come back to that in this committee also. So thank you, Stephen, for presenting that internal report on Mission 1 Cloud Services. The funding is another issue I'm sure we'll come back to perhaps more widely later on in this discussion, unless anybody wants to come in on it now, because it's clearly a very important issue for us. Claire?
So on that note, so we haven't got the where the cloud case currently sits, it's been to Welsh Government's investment group for review. There were a number of comments, so we submitted those comments back. That group meets again on Friday, so we would hope on Friday that we'd have some assurance around the approval of that particular business case. At the same time, we have it is part of our current discussions on our remit letter with Welsh Government. So I think we are probably in a stronger position than we were in the previous audit office, and a bit more confident that we will be able to focus next year on delivery of the cloud rather than the investment case and the approval of it. So fingers crossed we should get that clarified over the next coming weeks.
Thank you, Claire. That's a really helpful update. So diolch yn fawr. I'll bring this discussion to a close then, noting a very pleasing substantial assurance on the audit on Mission 1 Cloud Services. It's very, very helpful audit indeed, and pleasing to see management's response as well. So thank you all for your contributions to that discussion. I'm going to take us on now then to the second audit, which is Mission 5 on staff development. Stephen, and we've got Samantha Morgan as well, who's here as Director of People and OD to respond to the audit findings. Diolch, Stephen.
Thank you very much. This one is a bit more of an interesting audit. It's reasonable assurance, but there's still, we believe, a significant gap for improvement. Whilst we were completing the work, we did some extra testing just to determine if the objectives of what they're seeking to achieve are being embedded via other means. So additional actions are taking place or being implemented. And we found that generally that was to be the case. So that reason in itself is why we landed on reasonable assurance overall. But notwithstanding that, there still is quite a bit of work to undertake. We believe some of this may have arisen because of the leadership transition. So it sort of not necessarily fell between the gap, but paused at that particular point in time, and has led to the stalling of some of these items. So overall, we saw action taking place. We saw a strategy drafted to a degree, but work had paused. Alongside that, we found that initiatives generally were not fully aligned or incorporated into the strategy. Some of the deliverables, they weren't assigned to SMART criteria, so it was difficult to ascertain or understand the overall progress of those deliverables as well. Alongside that, the resources required to implement that, and we felt that there was difficulty with the level of resources to implement this anyway. So hence the recommendation around that. And again, reporting as well, a reporting mechanism to keep this on track, provide oversight of progress being made, and if it were to stall or fall behind, actions to address that. So overall, the themes of the conclusions were very much that it is reasonable assurance, but there is a lot of work to be done. We believe it's stalled because, as I mentioned, because of the transition period. We have begun to see it moving forward towards the tail end of the review, and as I said, we believe some of the actions are naturally underway as part of other work. But notwithstanding that, there's a degree of progress to be made to provide sufficient assurance that this is being implemented as planned, as scheduled, and it remains on track with the appropriate level of resource in place for that, whether it be financial or staff. So I think it's quite a detailed report, but it's a summary of the key findings that we came across. So welcome any questions.
Thank you, Stephen, for that introduction, a very helpful introduction there. Perhaps before I open it out to questions, it would be appropriate to formally welcome Samantha Morgan, who's just been who's just joined us, in fact. And this, Samantha, is your first appearance at Audit and Assurance Committee meeting, so you're very welcome. Would you like to respond to the findings that Stephen has helpfully highlighted for us? Reasonable assurance, but clearly a lot more work to be done. Samantha.
Diolch, Chair, and Bore da, colleagues. So thank you very much. And I think from our perspective as a team, we welcome this piece of work. We welcome the learning that it brings in terms of the audit results. I think I recognise a lot of what Stephen has just highlighted. There's a lot of really great work going on, and there's lots of actions being taken, but we need to make sure that we can align the work activity and provide assurance that it's actually delivering what we need to deliver as an organisation, and that we have the resources available to deliver that work as well. So I really welcome the audit reports. I think it's a fair representation of where we are at the moment. I've commissioned a piece of work with the team to look at all of the work that we've got going on, because we do need to bring it together, and we do need to have an operating rhythm where we're able to report and provide assurance on all of the work that we're doing. Resource will be an issue, and it is an issue that's come out in various different pieces of work and reports that we've been working on. So we will need to have a look at that in terms of capacity to be able to deliver what we need to deliver to support the organisation through a period of significant change. I think, learning and development, our workforce is our greatest asset. We need to make sure that we absolutely have clarity in terms of what we're going to be able to deliver, when we're going to deliver it, and what resource we have behind it to deliver it, and then hold ourselves to account in a way that's easily trackable. So really welcome the report. I think fair representation, and just to reassure colleagues that we already have a plan in place that is helping us achieve lots of the actions that are outlined in there. So I'm going to pause there. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Samantha. That's a really helpful response. I'm going to open it out now then, and I'll start with Ruth Glazard.
Diolch, Marion. Thanks, Sam and Stephen, particularly Stephen, for that outline of the report, because when I read the report, I was, I think similarly, probably in a space of, is this reasonable? But actually, we clearly need another category, reasonably limited, or something like that would fit better. So that was really helpful. That was a really helpful summary. And I suppose that's the question. Sam touched on it a little bit in your response there. The first set of actions to be delivered are coming up at the end of March, I think. There's a lot in here. So how reasonable is this plan in terms of delivering the actions? Particularly that first set, which will be here as soon as we turn around.
Do you like me to respond to that, Chair, as we get the questions? Yes.
Please do. It might be easier to do it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that's a really good question, and I am assured by the team and what I've seen within the team that this work is already in train. So I think those commitments to those dates are reasonable. They've been set with the team, not imposed on the team. So I am assured that work will be delivered by that timescale. Yeah.
Diolch, Samantha.
Thank you.
Claire Osmondson-Little, who's our Director of Finance. Claire, and I'm sure you're going to pick up on the funding resource issue.
So a couple of points for me. One is there are, of the 4 objectives, 3 of those objectives were reasonable and 1 was substantial. So there is, and I suppose that's why it was sort of weighing the other way. So what I wanted to reinforce is there's a significant amount of good work that's going on as part of building our future in developing the GDAD job profiles. We've done over 50 of those job profiles, and we are also working on how we support our staff through the transition through to a product-based delivery model, and deliver that for DHCW. That is such an important part of our future direction, and Sam and I are working hand in hand in that as part of that programme. In terms of funding, always a tricky one, admittedly, but actually we are committed to supporting the people in OD team, and have done actually, in terms of improving the resource within that area and also supporting them through this transition, and that will continue in the forthcoming year. So there is an awful lot of work going on in this space. We are an ambitious plan, so it is an ambitious strategic plan, as you would expect from DHW. What we need to do now under Sam's new leadership is to support her as part of that in really supporting the team that are going to deliver that. And you're quite right, Stephen, is really about how do we demonstrate through measures, through the Building Our Future programme, that we are delivering on those promises. And again, that'll be something that I'm sure the Audit Committee would want to come back and oversee probably early next year. But equally, that's what Sam and I are now working together on as part of that Building Our Future. So there were some good, there was, I thought, some really helpful reflections on the work that's currently being done, primarily with that team, to really future-proof DHW under the new GDAT structures and job descriptions.
Yeah, Claire, that's a really helpful response there. And I can see there's another question now then from Madeline Bryan-Jones. Diolch, Madeline.
Diolch, Chair. Following on from what Claire's just said about having oversight with it, I think it'll be useful to come back to the Audit and Assurance Committee on the progress in the future, but I think that's been already outlined. And I said, as Stephen's said, under the new leadership, a lot of these things have already been recognised and prioritised. So I think things will be more clear in the future about how we're going to move on organisationally with lots of these. And obviously have to prioritise, because as Stephen said, there's a lot of, the scope is quite broad. So we'll have some clarity on where we're going with them. Some of the things have been outlined, but I think the change of leadership has obviously had an impact on it. And I think that over time that, we'll be able to see that the vision that we have for the future, and with the Build Our Futures programmes, I'm very optimistic, and I think that the challenge will be accepted and we'll move on quite significantly. So I'm quite excited about seeing it come back to meeting and looking at the progress that's been made. So Jock and Val, Stephen, and thank you as well, Sam.
Yeah, Madeline. So we'll take that as an action that we'll come back to this issue and to measure and consider the progress against the recommendations outlined in this audit, which has been very, very helpful indeed. As you've helpfully highlighted, Stephen, it is a transition period. We are seeing the results partially of a transition gap in leadership, but it's clear that things have moved on and are moving on quite quickly. The resource issue, we've got some assurance from Claire that the team in the OD area is being supported, and we certainly look forward to seeing those recommendations being delivered during the course of the coming months. Diolch yn fawr I bawb. It's a very important audit. Staff development, as I think Sam, you yourself said, staff are our greatest asset, and it's important that we give due consideration to the work that's being undertaken to ensure that they can optimally deliver. Diolch yn fawr. We'll move on then to from the reasonable assurance on the staff development to the third audit on energy management, which is also an overall reasonable assurance. I'll now turn to Stephen and to David Butler to take us through this audit report. Diolch.
Thank you, Chair. I shall shortly pass across to David to provide a summary, but it's probably worth just touching on Alistair's earlier question when I mentioned we undertake a couple of pieces of work around energy decarbonisation, etc. This one will be of interest to the earlier question as well. So with that in mind, I shall pass across to Dave, and please feel free to carry on, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve. The rise in energy costs have raised the risk profile of this area, and accordingly, the audit was commissioned to review the risk mitigations and managements of these costs. These included implementation of a new national energy contract, which has been applied to the office energy in particular. Key aspects reviewed in the report included review of the implementation of the national contract, data verification and monitoring and reporting. The move to the new contract in 2023 presented some issues, including difficulties in providing accurate energy forecasts with the new suppliers to the participating organisations. The impact of those national issues wasn't as significant in DHCW as seen elsewhere across Wales. Energy consumption within DHCW relates primarily to the usage at the 2 data centres. Office energy costs are reduced by 38% last year, and estates rationalisation was ongoing at the time of the audit. Both data centres and office accommodation within DHCW are being actively addressed, with the core issues being addressed to drive down the energy consumption. Audit testing of data centre payments was satisfactory. However, there was some discrepancy between meter reads, invoicing and payments in respect of office charges. Accordingly, management have agreed to review the reasons for the anomalies within the office charges and the adequacy of the associated monitoring controls. Other issues identified during the audit are the need to ensure that energy reports to a dedicated scrutiny forum, such as the Decarbonisation Forum, the reporting data centre usage also to an assigned forum, and the accurate monitoring of office occupancy to better inform the ongoing reductions and estates rationalisation. Noting the reductions in energy usage together with the active management of the key issues, a reasonable assurance was determined. Happy to take any questions.
Diolch, David. I'll turn then to Julie Ash, who's going to respond then on behalf of the HCW. That's a very helpful introduction, David, to what is a very helpful audit once again on energy management. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David, as well. Firstly, just wanted to say we found the whole exercise very helpful, and it allowed us to review some of our processes. In direct response to some of David's observations, certainly agreed with the one about making energy reporting a bit more formal. So we've revised the terms of reference for our decarbonisation working group, which has now been renamed to include energy management. Also totally agree that there should be formally formal reporting of the data centre usage. So we've in our emissions return now, we actually have a separate line for that, and the Audit and Assurance Committee will see that in future reports. And in response to the final comment there around office occupancy, as David mentioned, we're continually looking to rationalise where we can, so that should see further reductions. But also we're implementing a new booking application, so that's going to allow us to more accurately have an idea of who is on site, when and where. So that should give us, that should inform the whole sort of estates plan going forward. Thank you.
Yes, Julie, that's a really helpful response outlining the measures that are already in train to address the recommendations. I'll now turn to the Associate Director of Finance, Mark Cox.
Diolch, Marion, and thank you, David, as well for the report. It was an interesting read, and from my perspective, we have finance representatives and Julie has estates representatives that sit on the Wales Energy Operational Group, and we see similar, albeit at another quantum of cost in terms of the issues in reconciling some of the invoices with actually energy usage. I'm just wondering, across the patch, have you seen particular actions that have been taken to address this. Obviously, for us in DHEW, it's not huge, but it's important to get right. And I've seen it raised within that forum as well.
Thank you, Mark. David, would you care to respond?
Yes, across Wales, people fell into two camps, really. There were those that were relatively unaffected by it, and then those that had great difficulty in reconciling their systems. So, for instance, some health boards had systems with half-hourly reads, and they had great dynamic difficulty then reconciling the periodic information that was coming through at a national level. And as you said, with going through to new suppliers, the forecasting was particularly an issue for many organisations. But some had their own internal systems where they were able to place substantial reliance on their internal information, and they didn't get those same issues. So there were for that reason, at a national level, for a while there was a moratorium put on the queries on the late payments of invoices, for instance. But I believe that's now been lifted, and these issues have been raised by all the health boards in general across Wales. So yeah, it as I say, it fell into two camps. Whilst the issues were there were many health boards relatively unaffected by it, but others were just knocked for six in terms of reconciling their internal systems with the new. So it's a mixed bag is the answer to that. But yeah, at a national, performance issues with these companies do remain an ongoing issue and have been raised and escalated through those forums that Mark's attending.
Diolch, David, and thank you for the question, Mark. It's always good to get a sense of the impact on the rest of the NHS Wales family. And finally then, Alistair, your question or comment.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you, David. This first question is probably more about energy cost than energy utilisation. I'm aware of some public sector organisations in Wales being able to reduce their energy costs by hundreds of thousands of pounds in a given year by moving to a different procurement framework. This may be a question more for Julie and Mark, but have we got the broadest possible procurement framework through which we're actually purchasing our energy? And just the second question, if I may, in terms of home working, what assumptions are we making around capturing the energy use for home working in the overall assessment of our energy use? Thanks very much.
Thank you. Really good question. Mal, Julie's going to respond, I think. Julie.
I'm going to try to. I think with regards to the contract, we're on a All Wales contract, which Shared Services actually negotiate for us. It was more on the second point, David. I was going to come in because I think we picked this up as part of the audit. Alistair, we do account for energy use in home working. We apply a specific formula. It's quite detailed. It assumes that there's probably going to be somebody else in the home, but we do actually report on that as part of our emissions. So just to assure you of that. Mark, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more on the contract basis.
Yeah, I think, Julie, just to reiterate your point, really, as part of a body corporate NHS Wales, purchasing power is in the economy's scale is when we all act together. And what generally happens is we have options and a basket of energy procurement elements, and there's a discussion, and this group has been set up in order to act together and act as one. And we've recently gone through that process, Alistair, in terms of determining what's best, not just for now, but obviously going forward. And obviously sustainability is a big piece of the considerations of the group. So yes, Jules, you're quite correct in that we are on the procurement contract, which is organised ostensibly by Shared Services.
Diolch, Mark. That's a helpful reminder of where we are in terms of our energy contract. Diolch, and to bring that discussion to a close, we've had 3 very helpful audits, 3 excellent presentations and introductions, and I'm grateful to colleagues as well for outlining our response as an organisation. It's very, very helpful indeed to be able to discuss in more detail the findings and the responses. Before we move on to our next agenda item, I'd like to go back, Stephen, if I may, to the initial update report.
Yes, of course.
There was one specific question. I mean, you've gone through the 13 reviews and the progress as planned. Colleagues will recall that at our last private session, we agreed to instigate a new review on adherence to recruitment policies and procedures. Fairly late in the day, but I just wondered what progress you're making on that particular audit and what is the likelihood that you'll be able to complete it by year end?
Oh, thank you very much. Well, actually, I can share some good news. We've completed our testing. It's gone through the review process. I actually have a draft report to review. So for all intents and purposes, our side, it is largely complete. It's just clearing that review process, which shouldn't take too long. I would expect us to be issuing the draft over the next couple of weeks or so.
Thank you, Stephen. That's excellent news. Diolch yn fawr. I'm going to move us on now then to the Audit Wales part of this agenda, the committee update and the Audit Wales annual report, which is also due to be presented to the DHCW's board meeting at the end of this month. And it's my pleasure now to invite Nathan Couch and Mike Whitley to present these reports. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So we'll take the audit update first then. It's a fairly short update from me. So yeah, the progress report provides an update to the audit committee on our current and planned accounts and performance audit work at DHCW. It also provides an overview of other relevant examinations and studies published by the Auditor General and relevant corporate documents published by Audit Wales since the last committee. In terms of the accounts audit update, our planning for the audit for the 24-25 financial statements is about to commence, and our report of nationally hosted IT systems is included in today's private committee papers. For the performance audit side, our 2024 annual audit report is included in today's meetings papers, as Marian's just mentioned, and our review of digital transformation is due to commence in February. Noting that for DHCW, that particular review will be split into 2 parts. The first focusing on its internal digital transformation arrangements, and then the second on the SHA's role as a system leader for the wider NHS in Wales, which will be completed later in the year. Field work for our local review on stakeholder engagement arrangements has concluded, and we're just currently drafting the report. In terms of other relevant examinations and additional information, exhibits 3 and 4 in the update provide links to those documents and additional information published by Audit Wales since the last committee update. Thank you, and happy to take any questions on that particular paper.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for that. I can't see any. Yes, Chris Darling.
No, it was just a comment, just a thank you to Audit Wales. Following the last audit committee, we agreed to follow up around their digital by design, their review into local authority digital transformation and the learning from that. And they will be attending our February board development to feedback some of the learning, which I think will be particularly important for us. So just a thank you to the Audit Wales team for agreeing to share some of that learning.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for that. I can't see any other observations, Nathan, so thank you for introducing that update report. I'll now turn to Mike Whiteley then, who will be taking us through the key findings from your work as Audit Wales with DHCW over the course of the year. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, Sorry,
I'll take it,
sorry,
Nathan,
Mike.
it's fine. I'll take
Fine.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
no worries, thank you.
You can carry on.
Thank you, Chair. We should have got our house in order beforehand, shouldn't we? But yeah, I'll take the introduction of the report and also take you through the audit of accounts elements, and then I'll hand over to Nathan, who'll take you through the performance work, if that's okay. So I suppose just a bit of background to the report. So this is a statutory report summarising our findings of our 2024 audit work at DHCW. On page 4 there, we summarise some of the key elements. But to note, I suppose we have brought all the detailed reports underpinning this summary report to this committee previously. So we'll try to keep this at a high level, but clearly happy to take any questions on any areas of the report before you today. So on page 5 of our report, which is page 95 of the agenda pack, key messages for the audit of accounts. I think, I say at every committee, but it's really worth reinforcing. The audit of the accounts, it goes really well. I think Claire's team have got a really mature kind of attitude when it comes to the audit and work in conjunction with us, which we don't experience at all organisations in all of our work. So it's really, really grateful for that. It was a really good performance. It was high quality financial statements presented to us as the draft, supported by comprehensive working papers, which really just do help make the audit go smoothly. And it's a great working relationship we've got with the officers as well. So the key points there to summarise in paragraph 12, we confirm we issued an unqualified opinion on the financial statements and did not identify any material weaknesses in internal controls. Paragraph 13, we just highlight there that we also issued an unqualified regularity opinion, so a clean bill of health on all fronts from the financial statements audit. We also do briefly mention there the IT environment and application controls. I won't go to that in any detail because we've got the report elsewhere on today's agenda. Moving on to Exhibit 1 on page 97 of the agenda pack, just a summary of the issues that were covered in our ISA 260 report. Again, whilst there were numerous amendments to the financial statements, there was only one which impacted on the financial position, which was 14,000, which, considering the level of spend the DHW has, is a really positive outcome. I think. Sorry, I've lost my place in my report now. This just happens when I'm trying to read stuff.
Don't worry.
It happens. So on to page 98, then we do give a bit more information about the regularity there between paragraphs 25 and 28, confirming that DHW met their financial resource limits for both revenue and capital. And then just to confirming again, there's no separate report or substantive report to go alongside the accounts. So that's it in terms of the audit of accounts elements. I'll hand over to Nathan now, who can take you through the performance work. Oh, Alistair, do you want me to take your question now before we move on?
Just a quick one, if I may, Mike, and thank you.
Yeah.
But first of all, just registering, it's not every public sector organisation that sees external auditors making complimentary remarks about a finance and audit team. So it's just to register. It's really pleasing to see that, and tremendously well done to Claire and the team. It's not something we should just take for granted or just see in passing. So great to hear. Just on the amount of capital that was underspent, I think it was 19,000. Are we having to return that, or are we managing to make use of that in other ways?
So I'll answer that one. That balance goes back to Welsh Government, the 19,000. To get it to 19,000, given the level of spend, which we had 3.3 million discretionary or thereabouts, and about, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, about 20 million or 16, 17 million of DPIF, getting it to 19k was quite an achievement, I think. But yeah, you're right. We would have to give those funds back to Welsh Government.
Yeah, great. It's just because I'm Scottish.
No.
Thank you. Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to add at this point, Claire, before I turn to Nathan?
I would actually, because if you remember the year before, the relationship was fine, but we had some improvements that we built into our working relationship with Welsh Audit and yourselves, Mike and Nathan, and it's great to see that actually it went really well. I just thought it's worth noting that most accountants getting to 14,000 would have left that as a non-adjusted balance, not Mark Cox. So much to Sean Williams, who's not with us, horror, he made us open the accounts and adjust it for the 14,000 so that there were no adjusting errors, which I think shows his level of drive and commitment to get the answer right. So I'd like to thank him for that, and also on behalf of Sean, because she enjoyed doing that adjustment through the accounts. But I think I'm delighted with that response, as I was at, and I mentioned it at year end, and I think it is about relationships and working relationships and being honest and transparent and open with our positions and where we are and where our concerns are. So I really welcome that. And I just wanted to put on note that, the team worked extremely hard to get to that position and improve the relationships on both sides. And you can see the outcome of it. I am worried, though, because how do we beat a report like this in our 4th year at DHCW? So I'll leave that for the teams to work together to maintain that level of working relationships. But thank you ever so much for those comments. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Claire. That's a really helpful response, and I'll come back and echo those very complimentary and positive comments at the end of the discussion. But before I do so, I'm going to turn to Nathan to take us through the performance aspect of the report then, if you will, Nathan. Diolch.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, on the performance audit side, the annual audit report sets up the findings from our 2024 structured assessment and cost savings arrangements review. I won't go through the findings slavishly, but we'll just reiterate our overall conclusions for those pieces of work. So for structured assessment, we found that DHCW's corporate arrangements support good governance and the efficient, effective and economical use of resources. However, it now needs to use its long-term strategy to demonstrate its value and consolidate its position as a digital system leader enabler in the NHS. For the cost-saving arrangements review, we found that DHCW generally has generally sound arrangements for identifying, delivering and monitoring cost improvement opportunities. However, it needs to rapidly progress work on its Building Our Futures transformation programme to reduce its reliance on non-recurrent savings. All the reports have been received by the Audit and Assurance Committee, so the annual audit report is really a formality which can go to board for noting. Finally, there's some appendices in the back of the report around work in progress and some assurance that the fee we set earlier in the year is the fee that we will be charging. And in the spirit of Mike indicating that the relationships are brilliant with DHCW from the accounts audit side, I can also confirm that from the performance audit side as well. So, yeah, thank you very much to Laura, Chris, and wider executive colleagues for the support throughout the year. I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Nathan. I can see that we've got a couple of hands. Mark Cox.
Yeah, and thanks, Chair, and thanks Nathan as well. My point is really on the savings element, and this has been a recurrent theme, really, I think, in terms of DHCW achieving recurrent savings. This year, that's where the focus has been. So we've got two elements, really. We've got the now, so the low-hanging fruit and developing a recurrent savings plan, and the more transformative, building our futures, finding more value element, which we're also taking forward. So what we've managed to do, and I just want to provide assurance to the audit committee, is hit our recurrent savings target this year. So in November, we had an approved position where £1.5 million of the savings were recurrent going forward. So we've managed to hit that, and that impacts on our underlying position and significantly improves that.
Thank you very much, Mark, for clarifying that point and highlighting the progress that's been made over the past few months on the recurrent savings. Alistair.
Thank you. And Nathan, can you, the audit fee is just over £200,000. Could you remind us, please, what it was a year ago? And is there any, genuinely, is there any reasonable reduction that one could assume from an audit fee, given the excellence of the team that you're working with within DHCW?
That's a good question, Alistair. Thanks for that. On the fee a year ago, you have to forgive me. I can't remember what the figure was. Mike might be able to say from his end, but yeah, in terms of the fee, how it's constructed, that's very much based on the skill mix for our team in the that provides services to DHCW, the risk profile of the organisation as well, and the relative size compared to other NHS bodies. So the fee itself for DHCW is probably a lot lower than what other health boards are charged based on that. In terms of sort of the excellent relationships, I don't think that has a real bearing on the fee itself. But I certainly, from my end, I really appreciate it in terms of delivering our work during the year.
Thank you, Nathan. That's very helpful. Claire,
So as a Director of Finance, earlier on in the year, the head of Welsh Audit Office, one of the heads of the Welsh Audit Office, whose name I've forgotten at the moment, came to present to the Directors of Finance to raise the value that Welsh Audit Office brings to NHS Wales. But they also highlighted that as a result of increasing audit requirements and the depth and analysis and the application of new audit tools, alongside their recruitment plans, as you're aware, last year we had a number of new Audit Wales teams that joined our audit. So they were looking at, they revised their charges nationally to reflect the pressures they were seeing as a result of the audit requirements, but also the recruitment that they need to make and the investments they need to make in order to undertake some of those audits. Those were scrutinised by the Directors of Finance and agreed nationally. So as DHCW, we had a fair reflection of those increases, and we all, as Directors of Finance, accepted those charges, just for information.
It would be useful, Chair, if I may, just to, when we see an audit fee, to simply have a reference for what the previous year was. Otherwise, it's just a number, floating in space, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair, for that. Noted. And finally, then, Mike Whiteley, before I bring this discussion to a close.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of last year's fee, Alistair, the 2023 fee was 189,000. So we do report the comparatives when we put the information in the detailed audit plan, which will come through this committee in due course. But also just, thank you, Claire, for that. That's much better than I would have said it, so thank you. And also just to confirm to members that if our audit do come in under that estimated fee, then a refund will be provided. We're not able to make a surplus on the work that we undertake. So when that kind of outcome is reviewed at the end of the year, if we've managed to be super efficient and undershot what we thought it'd take us, then we'll be issuing refund.
Thank you, Mike. And can I just finally thank Mike and Nathan for the Audit Wales update and annual report, which we are receiving for assurance. There have been some very complimentary and positive comments made, which is very pleasing for the Audit Committee to hear. But it works both ways, so I'd just like to extend the committee's thanks also to Audit Wales. You've talked about the mature attitude of DHCW, but that clearly reflects well on Audit Wales as well, because it is a two-way relationship. But it's very, very pleasing to hear about the excellent performance in both audit and performance, the good governance, the efficient use of resources. There are challenges clearly in terms of delivering recurrent savings, and we've heard from Mark that a lot of work has been undergone during the past few months to try and improve that situation. But at a year end like this, my thanks to Claire and the team. and also to Chris Darling and Laura. It reflects very well on both your teams that we've achieved such a positive report approaching our year end, and it'll be a pleasure to extend those comments at the board meeting towards the end of this month. Diolch yn fawr I bawb am eich cyfraniadau ac am eich trafodaethau. Thank you. So we are moving then swiftly on to agenda item 4.4, which is the audit action log. And I'll now invite Laura Tolley, Head of Corporate Governance, to update the committee on the current status of the log. Diolch, Laura.
Diolch, Marion. So this is the routine audit action log report that we bring at every meeting. And just to remind colleagues, following advice from internal audit, one action dependent on a third party is being managed via a separate log for tracking. So the committee received 3 audit reports at the last committee meeting, which contains a total of 13 new actions. Actions have been added to the log, which now contains a total of 25 open actions. 5 of these are on for the private section of this committee due to their sensitivities. From the actions, 13 are considered as complete and 11 are on target for completion by their target date. There is one action that is marked as red and overdue, and that requires a response from the executive lead. So this action is from the structured assessment in 2023, and it's for finance and business assurance. So since publication of the papers, I do know that work has been undertaken on this action. So I'll just invite Claire or members of the finance team just to update on this before I move on, Chair, if that's okay.
Thank you, Laura. And yes, my first red, I'm not happy about that one. But we are undertaking, as part of building our future, a financial blueprint that lays out the financial requirements going forward, but also the value those requirements make. Work on that is progressing really well. That's complete, and Mark is leading on that. But alongside that, there is also the funding requirements in order to marry the spend requirements going forward. That work was going to be done in conjunction with the governance review. That is slightly later than we would have expected. So we were hoping to marry the two, the funding requirement alongside the financial blueprint. So we would look to complete, well, the financial blueprint is done, but the funding requirement and the outcome of that, I think, is going to take a bit longer. But what we are doing is working alongside Welsh Government to secure the funding requirements for the short term, and that will then marry the two together. So from looking at both sides of the coin, from a spend requirement and value proposition, we are making good progress. What we haven't got is how that aligns to our funding formula alongside Welsh Government, and I think, if truth be known, I think it's unlikely that would be agreed between now and the end of the year, but we would be able to in the short term demonstrate that through our remit letter and our funding allocation for this year. So it's a bit later than what we would have expected it to be, but we would look by the end of March to have completed that, and then work alongside Welsh Audit Office to share those findings and demonstrate the blueprint model that we've developed to underpin that. I don't know whether, Mark, you want to add anything to that, as you're doing quite a lot of the work for us in that area.
Yeah, happy to, Claire. And it just sort of spills into the further agenda item. But so we set out the blueprint. So that's a 5-year sort of picture of the transition into the new target operating model and the transition of services from programs to business as usual. So we set that out. As Claire said, there's 2 sides to this going on, or maybe 3. So the first side of the coin is the costs. The second is the efficiencies and the cash releasing benefits of moving to the new target operating model. And the third is the value, the allocative efficiency. So are we investing in the in the activities that generate the most value in the organisation. And I think that's the key point. And for that, we need to sort of do the first two elements first, if that makes sense. And then, as Claire mentioned, the discussion with the Welsh Government regarding the funding.
Thank you, Mark, for that update. And thank you, Claire, for bringing us up to speed with the progress that's already been made on this particular red audit action. Ruth.
Thank you. And I think Claire and Mark have largely answered my question, but it feels like there's actually no end date to this action. It also feels like I would be doing the chair of DHCW a disservice if I didn't say everything to do with funding should be read, because it's out with our control. So actually we can only control the things which we can control, and the funding coming in is not one of them. And actually this is about how do we articulate our value proposition, which is an ongoing piece of work. That's what we need to be doing every single day of DHCW's existence. So I'm pleased to hear about the blueprint and kind of the 5-year blueprint, Mark. That's really helpful. So I guess my question is, how do we then make sure that we're monitoring this as an ongoing action rather than one that should have just finished in December, and because we're putting the nuts and bolts in place now, aren't we, for the blueprint? But we need to then make sure that on an ongoing basis, this is one of our key priorities for keeping an eye on, isn't it? Really, it's what we all need to be doing at DHCW to ensure that that value proposition is clearly understood and that we are really demonstrating the impact of digital for patients and on patient safety.
Thank you, Ruth. That's the challenge. I'm minded to ask you, Claire, for a brief response on this particular point. How do we, as a committee and as an organisation, track progress then against this challenging action, given that so much is out of our control?
Yeah, I would say in the short term, it's balancing our books, because we would demonstrate the value and the benefits propositions along that. I think the difference is we are doing a detailed governance review that is going to define the role of it will place greater clarity on the role and functions of DHCW, and from that, the funding formula associated with that should, I think, be updated and reflected. So the discussions we're currently having as part of our AMTP, that there are some activities that previously would be classified as a programme that actually are core activities within DHCW, and therefore should be reflected as a core allocation, not a annual allocation, in order for us to more efficiently allocate the resources and deliver the outcomes. So I think in the short term, as a committee, we would look as the financial result, and the ability to balance our books and demonstrate the value we create would be done through the finance report and through the activities we run. I think the only missing piece for me is, wouldn't it be good if, as a result of the governance review, we could underpin that future 5-year strategy by demonstrating security around some of the core activities and funding, and where there isn't that, and where it is genuinely programme and development, through the case that we get more insight and assurance around a 3-year or a 5-year funding requirement where programmes require it. I'm asking for a lot given the financial backdrop, and we're only working for an annual plan. So I think that was genuinely the intention, but given the financial position of not just the NHS but Welsh Government, I think there is a bit of, well, that might take us a bit of time to get to, but the common intent is there. So you're right, and that's why we had difficulty closing the action, and I think it's for us to, alongside Welsh Audit Office, to test that and to see if they're happy that we've answered the exam question in the short and medium term, and actually as part of the digital review that they're undertaking, it may well be that would inform then what the government might decide to do in the longer term. But it is a tricky one, and hence I think why we were a bit late answering the question and getting that done. So I think that's where we're at. Sorry, Marion.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Ruth, for raising that. Chris, I assume that you want to come in on this same point? And then we'll come back to Alistair. Thank you.
Yeah, just briefly on this. So what we have done, so we've put financial sustainability as a standing item on this agenda. That was one of the actions from the Board Assurance Framework. I think The other thing is perhaps to consider whether once we've had the remit letter, so assuming by the next committee meeting we'll have had that digested and understood what that means for us next year from a financial planning point of view and kind of impact on value. So it might be worth having a bit of a deep dive on the implications of, for the first time, having a remit letter and what that looks like.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. We'll take that away as an action. It's a very good suggestion, and we'll no doubt hear in due course what that remit letter entails. Diolch. And finally, then, before I draw this to a close, Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I'm very sympathetic to the point about we can only control our part of the world within the wider system. And indeed, this red should most probably appear in every publicly funded organization audit. However, just because it is a red, I just wanted to check out whether it's a typo or something that's just slipped in the action box. But in 4.5 on page 117 of the pack, there on the fourth line from the bottom, there's a sort of A, and it moves on to talking about the progressive value proposition, and it seems to be begging a B, or even a C. Now it might be that the B is efficiencies, the way that you've explained that, Mark and Claire, but either it's a typo or there's something that slipped, and because it's the only red, it might be the only one that draws attention from interested parties. So I'm only mentioning it for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you. It shows that you've read and reviewed this very carefully, Alistair. And Laura is very keen to respond. Laura.
Diolch, Marion and Alistair. It's just that action had a number of actions associated with it. So there was sort of an A, B and C. It's just the way the recommendation is. The other actions associated with it have been completed. So this was the outstanding one.
Diolch, Laura. And if you're content, we'll bring that discussion to close. And thank you, colleagues, for a very interesting and helpful discussion. We received the report for assurance. And finally, for this part of the agenda, then we will turn to agenda item 4.5, which is the local counter-fraud update report. And it's my pleasure now to invite Henry Bales, Head of Counter-Fraud, to present the progress update report. Henry, croeso.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll just quickly pick out a couple of points from the report. So this does cover Q3. I very rarely get the dates to match up, so I'm quite happy with that one. It did cover the whole of the quarter. It's nice to see. In the period, we've been involved in any corporate induction that's been held. There was only one during this period, just I think it was a festive period getting in the way. But they have started again in the new year, and we're booked into all of those moving forwards. E-learning, very pleasing to see it's gone up just under another 4%, up to 96.04% compliance. And I anticipate we'll keep seeing that progress go, and hopefully all the way to 100. It was International Fraud Awareness Week in November, and for that we did some online SharePoint pages and newsletter and tried to get that sent out. And a couple of colleagues did go down to the office in Cardiff and hand out some leaflets and try and speak to a few people down there. During the period, there were 2 intelligence bulletins. They were shared with the relevant departments, and there were no issues or concerns raised from that. And there has been an end to a national proactive exercise, which was set out by the Counter-Fraud Authority to look at procurement fraud risks in relation to due diligence and contract management. During our tests and checks, we didn't find any issues or anything unknown about in relation to fraud issues, and hopefully once that national report comes back with anything that was picked up elsewhere, I can give you a more detailed and hopefully beneficial outcome from that to take us forwards. National Fraud Initiative has kicked off. We've had only 12 matches come through the system at the moment. I believe there's other reports still yet to come out, so I'm expecting more, but as usual for DHCW, we will go through and check all matters for you, and I'll give you progress as we move forward throughout the year with that one. We had 4 referrals come to the team. 2 of them were in relation to the intelligence bulletins, and the other 2 related to formal investigations. One was transferred from another organisation and related to potential unauthorised access to records, which transpired to be not the case, and that's been closed. And the other one relates to non-attendance at work and estates there. That is still ongoing, so I won't go into that in any more detail. And happy to say no significant salary overpayments have come to me, which is great. And that is the end of the report. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, Henry, thank you for that very clear introduction, and pleasing to see that there are no key risks or key issues for escalation to this committee. Ruth, and then Claire.
Diolch. It was just a question for information on the fraud relating to non-attendance at work. I assume that those cases are referred to you once we've. It's a shame Sam has just dropped off the meeting. Actually, once we've followed all of our relevant internal procedures around staff and staff welfare and all of those kinds of things. And at that point, when we've exhausted everything we would do internally, it would be passed to counter fraud.
Runs side by side, if you like. So we do some of our investigation work that we can, but at the same time, people services will also make sure that we are looking after the individuals and doing all those checks as well.
Thank you. Claire.
Tricky mood. I just wanted, it's just a comment really. It's great to see that the HCW as an organisation has completed the counter fraud as part of its mandatory training, and it's above, I think it was 96% get in. Well done, DHCW. So again, I'd like to thank Henry and his team for supporting us in raising awareness and getting that job done. So yeah, good progress, and we've got to keep it up now.
Thank you, Claire. And can I just echo Claire's comments? It's a great figure and great to see such good progress being made on the counter fraud awareness training. Very pleasing to see. I can't see any other contributions, so thank you for joining us this morning and to present the report relating to the counter fraud work carried out in Q3 of this current financial year. And we look forward to seeing you at our next committee meeting. Henry, diolch yn fawr iawn. So that brings us to a comfort break, slightly later than planned. I suggest that we come back in 10 minutes time at about 2 minutes past 11 then. Thank you very much. See you very shortly. Well done, gyfeillion. Croeso nôl. Welcome back to the second half of the Audit and Assurance Committee meeting. I hope you had a good break. We now turn to part 5 of today's agenda, which starts with agenda item 5.1 and the high value purchase order and cumulative report. And it's my pleasure now to invite Mark Cox, who's Associate Director of Finance, to update us on the high value purchase order report. Mark.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you all. So this particular report just picks up the commitments of the organisation for the period from the 1st of October to the 31st of December. So it nicely picks up Q3 activity in terms of high value orders. It identifies the orders over £750,000. The relevance of that is the £750,000 is the board limit. It also picks up on cumulative orders in terms of suppliers which break the £750,000 threshold and normally wouldn't be highlighted in this report, but it's obviously useful to pick up on as has been requested from Audit Committee. I just want to pick up on some of the few highlights, I guess, in terms of some of the commitments over the period. In terms of the orders over 750k, we're now just under £49 million worth of orders that have been generated this financial year at 48.9 million. In terms of cumulative orders, we're just under £15 million at 14.4 million. Just picking up in terms of the content of some of those orders and some of the key issues arising, and in terms of some of the supportive deliverables for the organisation. Item A7 in the table, and indeed item A8, reflects the Citrix procurement, and that's item A7, and A8 is the VMware renewal. Now, those were key issues arising from last financial year, and really is a testament to NHS Wales acting as a body corporate to negotiate with suppliers and indeed drive down costs for the next financial year. So those two orders have been pushed through, and indeed they straddle financial years into October 2027. There's also been a significant order to support the GP migration. So in terms of some of the EMIS support, to support the migration of 56 practices from INPS to the EMIS software solution, item A11 reflects the order that was raised to support that activity. There's been a number of completed practices during that time scale from October, so 36. So a significant number have already been completed as part of that order. Also part of the activity for the Q3 was the firewall purchase. So item A10 reflects the purchase of the firewall from XMA. And also within the cumulative table, there's the support element. So there are two elements to this particular order. The first is the purchase of the kit and the software. The second is the ongoing support. Lastly, I'd like to bring to your attention the numerous orders that have been placed to support the e-library procurement. So this is multi-year arrangements with multiple suppliers such as Wolters Kluwer, Elsevier and Springer, and also Abisco, to support the e-library provision. I'd also like to bring to attention the audit committee, the good work that's been taking place within the e-library service management board to bring down costs. Over the last 3 years, they brought down costs by £200,000 and continue to review the e-library suite to make sure it's delivering value. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. It's a very clear report and very helpful actually to get a flavour of some of those orders and activity, which, as you rightly point out, reflects some very good work on behalf of NHS Wales corporate to drive down costs, and it's pleasing to see that being highlighted. Ruth.
I just wanted to say thank you, Mark, because you answered all my questions there. There's a lot on the cumulative list this year. You know, I'm a fan of looking at where we wouldn't necessarily flag things up to this committee, but that narrative really kind of reflects what our work profile has been over the last period and will continue to be, particularly with the work around firewalls and the EMIS work. So I think it's really important to highlight that. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for that report, which we are being asked to note, Mark. And I will invite you now perhaps to just provide us a brief verbal update, if you would, on the special losses and special payments. Thank you.
So in terms of the update for this period, Chair, there's nothing to report from the public sector. We will be reporting the decommissioning of some services, which doesn't constitute a loss, but is worth noting within the private section.
Thank you. We'll come to that in due course then. Thank you very much for providing us with those updates, and we'll move on then to the substantive agenda item for this next part of today's committee, which is agenda item 5.3 and financial sustainability. And I'm now going to invite Claire Osmondson-Little to introduce this, along with Mark Cox, who will take us through the budget for 25-26. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr, Marion. So this is the time of year where, as DHEW, we are busy pulling together all the activities and all the deliverables that we need to make over the next year in particular, but over the next coming years, and all of those need to be funded. So what Mark is going to take you through is a funding update, which really talks about our funding streams, and of which we have our core allocation, which is really the core activities, our business as usual in DHEW. On the 20th of December, it was confirmed that we would get an uplift of 1.77% of revenue and the pay award would be funded. And we also had an increase in our capital allocation, which Mark will touch on. That then leaves our programme funded, or the digital priority investment funding. And as we know, even this year, we are still finalising our Q4 position in that particular allocation. So we really welcomed a session with Welsh Government on the 10th of January, where they outlined the thinking around this allocation in relation to our key programmes. We are currently validating that and working alongside Welsh Government to finalise that, and Mark will talk a bit about that process. So that process is going well. That should be reflected in our future remit letter. Our SLA work, as you know, we were quite late in finalising that. This financial year is underway, and we will really start meeting with each health board a lot in February to finalise the SLA position. And that then leaves the GMS allocation, which again, we've summarised the requirement, albeit we may have to relook at that on reflection of the activities around the switch to EMIS. So the funding process is going reasonably well, and Mark will detail that in a minute. I don't want to steal all his thunder. But the important thing underpinning that is the value proposition, and really how we are going to demonstrate value in terms of our savings plan and ensuring our recurrent sustainable financial position. So Mark will touch on our efficiency savings plan. As we've shared with you before, as part of building our future, we're also creating value, and we've got a number of work streams that we're looking at to reduce cost, improve efficiency and create value. And finally, I think it's worth noting that we are trying to finalise our current year position. So alongside our future year, we are also looking to finalise our allocations for Q4 and our additional asks for Q4 alongside Welsh Government. So we're working alongside them to ensure that we produce a balanced position for DHEW in 24-25. So I'm now going to hand over to Mark, who's going to take you through some of those details and invite questions around those allocations and assumptions. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you all. The aim for this particular presentation, as we mentioned before, we are putting together a broader, longer-term 5-year cost profile and sustainability profile. But this presentation focuses on 25-26. Ensuring we break even or plan to break even for next financial year, and identifies the planning framework which was set by Welsh Government and presented on the 20th of December, as Claire mentioned, and what those implications mean for DHEW. So translating the planning framework and the assumptions underpinning that into DHEW's financial position for next year. I do want to pick up in terms of context, the overarching planning principles and approach, and indeed some of the thoughts from Welsh Government in terms of the budget setting broadly across health and social care, and hopefully you can see what impact that will have on DHEW in particular, and as well as broader NHS Wales. So just picking up on the overarching principles, there's a lot to these slides, and with the based on the assumption that you've been through these slides, I'll just focus in on some of the key elements, if I may, and pick up any questions after the presentation. So in terms of the overarching reflections and summary messages, there's been an additional 1.5 billion resource and capital entered into the system in comparison to the previous budget assumptions. The baselining will be from 24-25, so those assumptions will be on a recurrent basis. So the settlement represents an increase of 695 million resource and 235 million general capital. The capital is where DHEW has seen a significant increase for next financial year. So this particular settlement will effectively support not just the NHS Wales financial positions from last financial year. You'll be aware that each health board was issued with a control total and was required to meet progress in order to meet savings to deliver that control total. And indeed, a number of organisations have received additional funding or anticipate additional funding to support achievement of financial balance. The pay award for 25-26 is also anticipated to be centrally funded, so a significant amount of that increased budget will be ring-fenced and allocated to support the pay award. From DHEW's perspective, we have received a proportion of the increase in capital, which I'll touch upon later. So what were the principles, the overarching principles? The first one, and maybe one of the most important ones, was to address unwarranted variation. You'll be aware that there's considerable variability in uptake of DHEW's financial systems across the patch. So there's going to be a concerted effort, and indeed Claire and I met with a particular organisation yesterday to go through their particular uptake and usage of our systems. And internally, they're going to be looking in terms of a value assessment and option appraisal to make use of our systems, maybe even more. So a lot of this is actually filtering through to the financial planning process and financial leads, as well as operational leads. As you can see, I've highlighted point 3 there in terms of a combination of funding, savings, and cost control will be used as a platform to deliver sustainable financial positions. And that will be our area of focus in terms of finance. We'll be looking to remove any efficiencies, generate inefficiencies, generate efficiencies, and become savings going forward. There is an underpinning minimum savings expectation of 2%. Depending on our development requirements and our investor save requirements going into the next financial year, we may need to achieve more than 2%. So in terms of the approach and the allocation principles, there's multiple considerations going into the next financial year, but I'll just pick out the key one. As I mentioned, we will need to deliver a minimum of 2% savings. Now, all organisations will need to deliver a minimum of 2%. Now, it'd be interesting in terms of the challenge in the SLA process as to whether organisations look to deliver those 2% savings by reviewing the services that we supply to them. So I don't aim to go into all these slides of details, but as Claire mentioned, there is a baseline uplift in health boards, and that's flowed through to SHAs as well for a 1.77% uplift. We'll be looking to have the recurrent impact of the 24-25 pay award funding in our baseline for the next financial year. And as I mentioned, the 25-26 pay awards will be centrally funded, and so won't form any part of our cost pressures going into next financial year. So in terms of SLAs, Claire mentioned there was significant delay, I think, safe to say, this financial year in terms of closing out our SLAs and getting them duly approved. There's been stronger guidance this year, and we're heartened by that, to be honest with you. We're heartened by the fact that it's unequivocal in terms of the 1.77% uplift. Claire, Chris, and I met with a director of finance yesterday to set out our planning assumptions, and they were accepted, and they were quite clear, quite transparent. So hopefully we are planning to get the SLAs all signed by the 14th of February. And we have actually been engaging with numerous forums, so Directors of Digital, National Service Management Boards, in order to get approval for our planning assumptions. So we've done our due diligence in terms of communications and engagement. It should be noted that one of the key milestones for the planning cycle for this financial year is that by the 20th of February, there's a requirement to confirm to Judith Paget that we've signed all the SLA letters, or whether there's any particular disputes or disagreements. So in terms of principal approach, in terms of the capital side of things, as I mentioned, there is an increase in capital anticipated for next financial year, and DHEW's impact on that allocation is an additional 281k for next financial year, bringing our discretionary capital allocation up to 3.3 million. So in terms of next steps, obviously there's a statutory duty to break even, and we'll be producing our finances and our financial plan to support that. We also have to make sure the plan is triangulated between finance, workforce, and the capacity and the resource requirements. And we've got operational meetings with all the directorates and the planning team to make sure it's consistent and deliverable. So just picking up on the underlying deficits, we will go into that in a little bit more detail later on. One of the key elements of feedback we received this year as part of our plan was the transparency regarding our financial cost pressures and our underlying position, and our ability to communicate that to the NHS executive. So we aim to take a similar approach this year and be in a position to evidence that we've taken steps to minimise our underlying position going forward. So this basically is a summation of the planning assumptions for next financial year, and I'd just like to quickly take you through the timetable. So as we mentioned, the 20th was the deadline, or the anticipated date to get allocation letters. We're due to receive ours hopefully over the next month or so. On the 14th, there will be the first accountable officer letter. So Helen will be tasked with writing an accountable officer letter should we be unable to forecast break even for next financial year. And on the 20th, as I mentioned, the accountable officer in terms of the SLA LTA position agreements. On the 31st of March, we will submit the final financial plan alongside the IMTP. In terms of what does that mean for DHEW, so just picking up on some headlines, there's a 1.77% increase on core and SLA funding. As I mentioned, there's the £3.2 million capital allocation, discretionary capital allocation, and also there's the target of 2% of 1.4 million savings. As I mentioned, that may increase depending on any development or investment activity that is approved going forward. So in terms of numbers, the anticipation is an increase in core funding of 1.1 million, a current increase in funding of 3.2 million to support 24-25 pay award. In terms of primary care, there's an uplift of 300k to reflect the 1.77%, pay award of 300k, and the GP migration support of 2.9 million. Now that's against the initial plan, and that's subject to change depending on the INPS position. In terms of SLA, the anticipated position after our SLA negotiations is a £500,000 increase and a £2.3 million increase as a consequence of the Year 4 Microsoft licensing agreement. In terms of pay pressures, we've identified some incremental pay pressures of 800k, some macroeconomic inflation, so that's the contract inflationary elements inherent in some of our agreements with suppliers of just under £1 million. Some unavoidable contractual obligations in terms of some of the discount tapering of contracts. The consequences of national investment decisions of 400k, and to be confirmed is the impact of the local investment decisions. So what does that mean? So just tracking from left to right, and this, apologies, this graph is a bit busy, but does take into account all the elements impact on our underlying position. So from left to right, the carry forward underlying position as identified in our MTP was 2.7 million. Now we've taken steps in year to reduce that by way of the recurrent savings plan that I mentioned early on, and some recurrent funding gains to reduce that to just 246k to bring forward into the 25-26 reporting exercise. As I mentioned, we have pay pressures increases, we have macroeconomic inflation, we have some contractual and avoidable increases, and the investment decisions increases come to a total of 2.8 million. There is an element of growth as well, and that reflects increase in usage and data storage. So that brings us to an overall pressure of just under 3.1 million. We do have mitigating actions or mitigating items to reduce that total of 2.9 million. So that incorporates the Welsh Government uplift I just described, the SLA uplift, the 2% savings target, bringing us to an underlying position of just over 100k. So a significantly improved position as part of our plan. On the right-hand side are the items to be agreed or to be decided regarding in relation to how much funding we receive going forward. So the cloud cost of £2.7 million. As Claire mentioned, the business case was submitted to Welsh Government, and we've issued feedback, and we are looking for a final position on Friday. We also have noted that the funding has been included in our draft indicative funding for next financial year. Cancer solution and also NHS app as part of the strategic priorities to move to core. And we've also have indicative indication that that particular funding will be made available next year, but we again it's to be discussed with Welsh Government and to be formally communicated to us. We do have some risks around SLAs and business cases such as the NDR, which has a significant API resource element incorporated within the business case. So we've incorporated some risks just to reflect those uncertain items until the business cases and the SLAs have been formally agreed. We do have some opportunities which we're exploring as part of the financial planning process. So that brings us significantly down in terms of managing the risk position, and in fact leaves us with a positive gain of 750k should all the risks and all the opportunities crystallise. So on the far right hand side is a development that's currently being considered and a business case currently being written in terms of the ITSM, that's the IT Service Management Tool, development and implementation, and that particular solution will contribute to significant efficiencies going forward. So we believe in terms of investor save, it's a positive and I would say a real significant item we should look to proceed on. But as I say, at the moment that business case is currently being drafted and will be put to executives for approval. So I think in terms of our overall profile and the current indicative position as the plan has been put together thus far, we've made significant steps to reduce the underlying position and put us in a firm and solid foundation financially going into next financial year. So I'd just like to pick up on some of the transformative areas that we're looking at in terms of cost removal and efficiency. And this is fundamentally incorporated into our 5-year sustainable funding model. So we've identified opportunities to explore for divestment, rationalisation under the cost removal heading. We've also looked at efficiencies and how we can look at improving efficiencies and productivity and generate both cash releasing and non-cash releasing benefits that can be incorporated within the plan. So that's all within the Building Our Future 5-year financial sustainable profile. And as Claire mentioned, we are significantly along the process in terms of finalising that particular plan. The next few slides just present how we're going to incorporate and deploy the financial plan. What are the particular products? We've got what's called a minimum data set that's used to support the IMTP. It is quite detailed in nature, and it identifies any cost pressures we've identified as part of the financial plan. Goes into detail regarding savings, risks, and the profile of spend throughout the year. So it's quite detailed. It's a number of spreadsheets we use to support the financial plan. In terms of deploying the plan, we've got a set process where the Chief Executive and Director of Finance, upon approval by the SHA boards, will then delegate the budgets to the executive directors, who will then delegate the budgets down to budget holders for the operational delivery of their services. And I think that's all I wanted to cover. There's a number of letters and notifications as part of our financial governance wrap, and the directors actually have to sign off on their budgets and their savings target for the financial year. And once they become live, we look to monitor financial performance and savings performance very closely as the year progresses. So I'll stop sharing there. I'm afraid I can't see any hands, but I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. As I said, it's multiple slides, and I'm hoping that the cover letter will also support some of the detail.
Thank you very much, Mark, for a very clear presentation and a very helpful detailed set of slides, which has helped enormously in terms of our understanding of the current position. It's heartening to hear the stronger guidance from Welsh Government this year, and heartening to hear that your planning assumptions have been accepted. Looking back 12 months ago, there was some challenge around the signing of the SLAs, and I just wonder, before I open it out to colleagues, what's your level of confidence that we'll get to signing these SLAs in accordance with the plan timetable?
So I think it's carrot and stick, to be honest with you, Marion, in terms of signing it off. I think it's really useful to have the framework in terms of the accountable officer letter to go to Judith Paget, because no organisation wants to be there. Secondly, the unequivocal direction from Welsh Government also helps. But also that in terms of the carrot, Claire, Chris and I met with one of the directors of finance yesterday to go through not only the process and the plan assumptions, but also the value and the benefits side of things as well. So it's a more rounded approach, I think. Obviously, we've got our dual sort of activity taking place, which is led by our service management team, who produce a value pack, which will also help in terms of providing assurance, I think, to organisations that what they're paying for, they're getting value from. In terms of confidence, I think I'm more confident than I was last year. That might not be an empirical figure in terms of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, but I'm more confident, given the direction we've had from Welsh Government, that we can get those over the line.
Thank you, Mark. I'll turn to Claire first, perhaps, because you might want to respond to my direct challenge, and then we'll open it out to Alistair. Claire.
So Mark's right. He echoes a lot of the work that we've invested a lot of time in relationships around the table to demonstrate transparently our cost pressures, our position, and the value that we now measure and create for them in the system. And also there's 2 parts to it. One is our costs, which are the 1.77%. We also then allocate the Microsoft costs, and it is really interesting to look at the comparison. The Microsoft increase is about 5 times that of ours. Well, it's not quite that, but so from value for money and it cost per user, I think it demonstrates value. And again, learnings from last year. They've brought the timetable forward. There is a clear direction from Welsh Government in terms of their assumption. But we would like to work collaboratively with our end users, listen to where they feel that we might not be adding value, and also to look at our operational performance for each of those products, which actually has improved this year and is far more consistent. So we've had a couple of meetings now, and we've got a few more to go. So I would like to echo Mark's sentiment that we have a working relationship, and they will settle the SLA agreements and work with us to create more value. But we'll wait and see.
Thank you, Claire. Alistair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Mark. Really, really helpful. Though I have to confess, I didn't read every word on every slide as they went past. Fortunately, I had my binoculars ready for some of the closer detail. But very helpful to see. Also, really clearly, it's helpful to at this stage have. I don't want to use words like optimistic, but to have a significant element of concern resolved, it would appear, without putting the curse of the nails on that. That seems encouraging. I just had a few points, brief ones, which maybe you'll be able to address briefly. If the uplift is calculated against the 2% efficiencies, how does our net position compare with a year ago? In terms of overall revenue budget, funding, it would be very helpful to just have a perspective on that. Secondly, the need to deliver those 2% efficiencies against our revenue budget, how does that compare to any directive regarding capital and how we use capital? And are we seeing a long-term degree of migration by us due to cloud from revenue to capital? And to that extent, if there is more protection, any greater protection in capital, does that put us in a better position? Question mark, a few assumptions in my question there. The effect of NI changes to third-party contracts and subcontracted procured or commissioned services. Do we know what that impact is and how much that is going to take out of our budget in the year ahead? And just finally, to what extent, it's one thing to have a budget established that allows us to move into the next financial year with a degree of stability, incredibly important. But also incredibly important is the aspect of how well our spending plans and our overall budget directly relates to our strategic plans and our strategic priorities, which has a strong relationship to the system strategy. And so I just wondered, it might be possible for a brief comment on how the budget might relate to long-term strategy and whether or not the two are, almost operating in different worlds. But thanks.
Thank you, Alistair. That's a really good question to end your observations. Perhaps we can start with that and then come back to the other 2 points. Thank you. Claire.
I'll pick up the strategy points and how does this correlate and how do we demonstrate value that net off the cost pressures that we are trying to address. So as Mark showed in his slides, we look at value through a number of lenses. One is on taking cost out, which is improving our efficiency. One is improving our efficiency in the things that we do. And the other one is creating value through collective working and co-production. So as part of building our futures, we've looked at simplifying our architecture and removing the dependencies on licenses around some of our key contracts. We've looked at simplifying everything we do, not just with our architecture, but in the way that we organise our programmes and deliver our programmes. But we've also by moving to a product-based delivery model, we are going to create the skills within DHEW and reduce our dependencies on third parties to undertake a lot of the discovery dependence work and some of the business case development work, but all the way through the product development to do that for ourselves. So if you look at how we're going to create value in the longer term, it is by reducing our spend on capital in data centers and moving to a cloud-based operating model and really trying to drive efficiency on our data. It's about simplifying our architecture so we don't have a large number of suppliers creating systems for us that have licensing dependency. It's about having the data and having a simplified architecture that reduces that complexity and improves efficiency. And it's actually through the whole delivery model is internalizing the skills to enable us to deliver that more as DHEW. That's strategically where we're looking at. And we've built those around our principles, simplifying everything we do, etc. So that's how it fits to our strategy. And therefore, some of that will mitigate some of the cost pressures through using third-party consultants, for example, because we would hope that we can develop those skills within DHEW. There will still be a dependency on that, but it should be less than what we currently see. And we should see a smaller number of programs and a more integrated product delivery, which will also help deliver our savings. So in short, in the next 12 months, as we shift to that operating model, we will start to see some of those recurrent savings come in. We talked earlier, didn't we, about the CO2 and the fact that we are improving the efficiency of our energy, and that's reducing our CO2 footprint by over 30%. But actually, some of that translates into a recurrent requirement for less energy. So there's a whole raft of things that we are doing as part of building our future that will mitigate and reduce the costs, but not only that, the efficiency and effectiveness of the way we deliver our products. So I think that neatly fits to our strategy and correlates to it. So that, in terms of the NI cost pressure, currently we have a framework agreement, a multi-year framework agreement with a number of our suppliers, which will help mitigate some of that cost pressure in the short term. But inevitably, in the event that we do need to contract third parties next year, there will be the impact of that will start to follow through. And then in terms of, are we being able to net off? On the one hand, we've got a 1.77% increase, and on the other hand, we've got a 2% savings target. How does that correlate? Well, that fits really with that is built into our savings target. So we look at the net effect of that, and we've got actions and activities to mitigate that, some of which we are already working on for next year. So we've got a degree of confidence with those, and others are yet to be finalised. But again, with the Building Our Futures work that we're doing and that financial blueprint, we know in what areas of DHEW there are cost pressures and there are efficiencies, and how we work collectively to mitigate that. So there is a lot of work underneath the surface with our blueprint, with our strategy, with Building Our Future, that takes all of these external and internal factors together and then translates that into ultimately into a directorate financial allocation for next year. I don't know whether, Mark, I've missed anything, or if there was anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think it was just around your first 2 points then, Claire, because you've more than covered the last two from Alistair. I guess taking your second point first, it's around the capital v revenue question, isn't it? And the fact that are we jumping from the frying pan into the fire in terms of moving away from capital revenue? I think in terms of our current overall estate and the surety of capital funding, the uncertainty regarding having future capital funding to refresh our estate provides significant risk. We have moved from a CapEx, or we are moving from a CapEx to an OpEx model, so from a capital expenditure to a revenue-based operational model as part of the cloud. What we've seen is licensing suppliers move from a perpetual licensing pricing model, so subscription based. So fundamentally, what we're seeing is a shift from capital funding requirement to a revenue funding requirement, and I don't see us putting that genie back in the bottle really, and shifting back to capital. Just to answer your first question and give you some order of the change in funding from last financial year or this financial year in terms of the anticipated for next financial year. In terms of core, we're receiving this year 63.7 million. For next financial year, as we stand today, we're expecting for that to increase to 74 million. And the reason for that is there's going to be a transfer from separate budgets into our core. So we're going to get over 5.9 million pounds transferred into core. That's the indicative planning assumption to support our business as usual within NHS apps and cancer, and also in terms of some of the Optom licensing work that we've took on this year. So that's a welcome development if it happens, in terms of having security of income going forward. And as I mentioned, we also get the 1.77% increase of over £1 million and the £3.2 million increase to support the pay award. So it's a significant jump up in terms of our core funding for the next financial year, which will be incorporated within the financial plan.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, colleagues, for a really interesting and helpful discussion. I don't want to prolong the discussion because we are slightly behind schedule. I was really interested to hear about the concerted action that's taking place to address the unwarranted variation, as you put it, in the take-up of our services. And I think I'd like to come back to that again at a future meeting, because I think it's a really important area for us to assess and take assurance. So we will take that as an action to take it forward at a future meeting, if that's okay with you. So thank you for that report. So we are being asked to note the DHCW financially sustainability report and the budget plan for 25-26. And thank you both again for your very helpful contributions in informing this committee of the important and crucial work that's being undertaken going forward, and positive to see a significantly improved position with the hopefully putting us in a firm financial footing going forward. But clearly depends on the remit letter and a lot of work to be completed between now and year end. Thank you. Let's turn then to the corporate risk register, which is agenda item 5.4. And I'd now like to invite our board secretary, Chris Darling, to update us on the corporate risk register.
Chair. Thank you, Marion. So I'm just going to run through the current position. There's 13 corporate risks, 3 of which are assigned to this Audit Assurance Committee. And as mentioned earlier, the one area on the agenda, the previous agenda item, financial sustainability, is on as part of the board assurance framework, recognising the need for financial sustainability to become a trusted strategic partner as part of Mission 5. So any feedback from committee members on whether there's more you want to see on that or how that's presented would be gratefully received in terms of making sure we are deep diving as a committee once into that area. In terms of the 3 risks assigned to this committee, I'll just run through each of them. So there's the 0313 digital cost pressure service model changes risk, which has come down in risk score, but still on the risk register since the cloud business case was submitted. 0331, the fixed term resource funding. I think board members are aware that without certainty over funding, particularly relating to some of our major programs next year, we've been unable to confirm with some of our staff funding and implications in terms of resources for next year. And then finally, 0337, the sustainable digital services and development funding, which very much links to our sustainable funding model. So the three risks are all assigned to my finance colleagues, and Mark attends our risk management group. So I'm just going to see if Mark wants to comment on any of those, particularly probably the first one in terms of where we've got to around the digital cost pressure, Mark, and the cloud case, and whether we're at a point where we think that could be mitigated further, or at what point you think that could be.
Thank you, Chris. Happy to pick up on those. In terms of reviewing the score, obviously we've mentioned that the business case will be reviewed again on Friday. I think after that we could have a discussion around reviewing the score, depending on the outcome from that. As Claire mentioned, in terms of our indicative funding, it has been incorporated within the Welsh Government position for now, pending the approval of the business case. And I guess that at that point, Chris, it would be prudent to review the risk and possibly downgrade it. I'd just like to pick up on the fixed term element as well, the fixed term risk. So obviously we've been reviewing and quality assuring some of the data that's incorporated within some of the intelligence gathering exercise that's been taking place for the last few months, and particularly identifying some mitigating actions should funding assurance not be provided by Welsh Government. My assumption, Chris, is that subject to receiving a formal letter from the Welsh Government, we'd probably look to review the risk scoring, because my sense is from the indicative funding proposal that a number of those risks for 25-26 at least will be mitigated. I think there's a financial risk element which we can look at mitigating, but there's a delivery risk element as well in terms of ensuring continuity of skills and business knowledge of some of the fixed term staff we have in place at the moment. And this particular sort of resolution doesn't address that. What will address that is some element of flexibility in how we can direct that funding, and I think that's coming as well.
Thank you, Mark. Chris, do you want to add anything?
Not to those, Marion. I just wanted to flag. So 6 risks have been removed since the last committee meeting. 1 new risk has been added. I did just want to mention the 1 new risk, not necessarily to deep dive now, because I know it'll have a full discussion in board at the end of next week. But the GP system supplier risk, I think board members will be aware of the current position, and probably just worth noted, it was quite unexpected, the position we found ourselves in terms of that system supplier. And Sam Hall, our Director of Primary Community Mental Health, has done a huge amount of work engaging the wider health and care system over the last 4 weeks, and we should know more by next week. So it's just to say, I think for the committee to be aware that new risk has come on. It is taking a lot of resource from that part of the organisation, which clearly will have implications on other things, but it's very much a live situation. So hopefully in a week or so, and certainly at board, we'll have a fuller update that we can get into.
Thank you, Chris. That's really helpful. So let's park that then and await for new information. Are there any comments or questions from colleagues? No. Okay. Well, we are asked to note the 3 risks on the corporate risk register assigned to this committee, and noting the change in the score for the digital cost pressure risk, which is specifically assigned to this committee. And we are also noting the changes in the HCW's risk profile since our last committee meeting, with that 1 new risk in referring to the GP system risk, that new risk being added and 6 risks being removed from the risk register. Thank you very much for that, and we look forward to a wider discussion at board then in 10 days' time. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to agenda item 5.5, which is the Procurement and Scheme of Delegation Compliance Report. And it's a pleasure now to invite Julie Francis, sorry, it's Claire, isn't it, in Julie's absence, to present the Procurement and Scheme of Delegation Compliance Report. Claire.
I'm going to hand over to Chris, because Chris is going to step up in Julie's absence and talk us through that report. So I'll hand over to Chris to talk us through. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Marion. So yeah, the report is being presented to the committee for noting. It covers the period from the 1st of September 2024 to the 30th of November 2024. During that time, there were 2 single tender actions and 1 contract extension during the period, and the appendix document sets out the detail of those contract awards and the reasons. Just by way of brief summary for the committee, the 2 single tender actions relate to software contracts. There was a test environment and some analytics software. Both of those built upon either a pre-existing technical setup or usage of software that we already had in place. There was 1 contract change note, which was to extend some of the cover we had for commercial advisory services for strategic and complex procurements. And that was approved by the SHA board in September 2024. So that's kind of a high level overview and summary. As I say, the report is there for noting, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that very clear introduction. I can't see any hands up. So clearly the report has provided all the answers to any questions that colleagues might have. So in the interest of time then, I'm going to say that the committee notes the Procurement and Scheme of Delegation Compliance Report. And thank you for introducing. Let's move on to agenda item 5.6 then, which is the Quality and Regulatory Compliance Update Report. And I will now invite Paul Evans, the Head of Quality and Regulatory, to update us on this issue. Paul.
Thanks, Marion. I'll just raise some key points from the report, if I may. I've arranged them by themes. So firstly, around audit. Excuse me. There were 3 external audits conducted within the last quarter, those being a combined ISO 30415 and British Standard 76000 audit, a British Standard 10008 audit, and the Service Desk Institute audit. The SDI audit report is still pending, although I understand that the 3-star rating has been retained. For the other audits, there were a total of 1 minor non-conformity and 13 opportunities for improvement raised, but up to 20 findings successfully closed out during those audits. From an internal audit perspective, our risk-based internal audit program continues to operate efficiently and is currently at 100% compliance with the plan. Moving us on to our quality management position. Our current document position, as in documents within review date, is at 94%, with a target of 90%, so we're above target there. And most pleasing is our non-compliance figures, which have increased from 48% within target to 90% during the last quarter, with number of open findings reduced from 80 to 60. From a legislation perspective, there's been no further changes from the MHRA in relation to medical devices legislation. We were promised the new draft legislation before Christmas. It's still not forthcoming, but we have registered with the MHRA for an account in readiness for our first piece of software as a medical device, which is currently under development to enable us to register that with the MHRA at the appropriate time. Moving on to duty of quality, we conducted a series of workshops across all directorate SLTs, and the summary of those workshops will be included in the next Always On report, which is currently being generated. and we continue to participate in the National Duty of Quality Reference Group chaired by the NHS Executive, and that group is currently working on a self-assessment tool for organisations to assess themselves against the duty of quality. Supporting the duty, the quality framework that we've been developing was presented to Claire and Chris before Christmas. We've made some changes on the back of that presentation, and also developed an interpretation of the 12 quality standards from a DHCW perspective to include in the framework, and that piece of work is currently under review by Chris. Once it's been reviewed and agreed, we will then start engagement with wider DHCW senior management to finalise the framework, and a milestone around that has been included in next year's IMTP. And the final piece I wanted to just cover was the quality improvement framework. So we are continuing to deliver the 5-minute improvement training, and held a 10 talk in December to launch the next step, which is the fundamentals of quality improvement. We had 110 people attend that 10 talk, which was really pleasing. And to date, we've had 107 staff sign up for 5-minute improvement and 56 for the fundamentals training, which actually starts on Monday. We've also got a session booked in at the board development in February and April to deliver a board level QI overview. And then the next piece of the puzzle, which we're currently working on, is a QI coach training package with an aim to roll that out in Q2 of the next financial year. That's all on the update, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a very, very clear report and a detailed one. Ruth.
Thanks, Paul. I just want to say well done on the internal quality performance metrics over the last period. Obviously, a lot of hard work from yourself and the team. So my question obviously is, give us a little bit and we want more. What's made the difference in that last period, and how do we keep that performance up?
A lot of effort is the short answer, Ruth. I mean, the position isn't my team's position. I mean, I hold my team to a higher standard and expect our documents and non-compliances to be at 100% ongoing. But it's the work the quality business partners have done with each of the directorates, really, to get them to understand their responsibilities around their document management and non-compliance management. And I think the pennies dropped. There were a lot of documents that were overdue because of the migration from SharePoint onto iPassport. So, you know, there was a mountain decline there to get on top of those documents, but they by and large, they've done that now. So, I mean, moving forward, it's just the quality business partners keeping a bad level of engagement and making sure things don't slip.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Paul. And can I just echo Ruth's comments? It's really positive to see that number of positive audits and closure of those previous non-compliances, a really heartening position to see. And also good to see the improvement in the uptake of the quality improvement training, which is such a key part of our strategy going forward. So thank you for that. We are asked to note the content of the update report and the duty of quality update, which we do. So thank you again, Paul, and thank you to the team for the positive improvement we've seen over the last quarter. Diolch yn fawr. And thank you also for providing the forward plan for the next quarter, which is interesting and helpful to read. We'll move on then to the estates decarbonisation and compliance report, and it's Julie Ash's turn to present this report, which we've been asked to note. Julie, diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr, Marian. Thank you very much. So as you've just introduced, this report covers 3 areas. So we have estates development, decarbonisation and compliance. So I just wanted to touch on reporting first, just to assure the committee that we're up to date with all of our reporting into Welsh Government. So we annually submit emissions returns and a narrative return, and also under a relatively new reporting regime, which is known as DCR, decarbonisation reporting. 6 monthly updates, which provides progress against each of the NHS Wales decarbonisation initiatives. And those reports all come to this committee for oversight. So firstly, just on estates development. So there's a lot of focus at the moment on the redevelopment of the ground floor of T Glan Avon, which we're forming into a sort of a conferencing facility, a space for user-centred design and digital inclusion. So very exciting indeed. So a little update from the time I actually wrote this paper is we have actually now awarded the contract for works. So members will be pleased to be able to see some progress happening in that space soon. So we've got a project manager in place managing that, which is all working very well. We're also looking to do a bit of modernisation in Boken Park, which is becoming particularly well utilised now. So just to ensure that all of our space reflects the digital organisation that we are. We've installed some new EV charging facilities at Boken Park as well. And finally, we've emptied Castlebridge 2, which is a second office in Cardiff that wasn't being utilised. And we intend to give up that lease at March 2025, which is at lease end. So that'll see some further rationalisation there. Just on back to T Glan Avon, so we've received a proposal for a new lease, which would run from the 1st of April 2025. As part of that lease, we've negotiated improved access, so work will begin shortly on installation of a new ramp, which will replace the current accessible lift that's in place at the moment. We also, in T Glan Avon, are sharing some space with the NHS Confed and also Health Technology Wales. So that's under sort of licence and a motto, respectively. So I think that was all I was going to say on estates development. So I just move quickly on to decarbonisation, which we did touch on as part of previous discussions as well. But in the paper, you'll see that our reduction from our baseline year is showing as 57%. We'll point out that includes supply chain, which is why it doesn't tie up with the previous figure we talked of 38%, which is operational. And on compliance, pleased to say we've retained 14,001 certification. I think Paul will correct me if I'm wrong, but we've got an audit due, I think, in March coming up. So I think we're agreeing the detail of that at the moment. And overall compliance of plant systems and equipment is now 89%, which is well ahead of the 90% target. And also very pleased to say that internal PPM remains at 100%, again, well ahead of the 90% target. So I think that was it from me, Chair, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for that very clear introduction. I can't see any hands up, so I think the report actually was very detailed. And as we note it, I'll just draw attention, it's really positive progress made on our decarbonisation journey, and really good to see that as well as on the estates compliance. So thank to you and to the whole team for the good work in those areas. Diolch yn fawr. Let's move on to the Welsh language report then, which is agenda item 5.8. And I'll now turn to Laura Tolley, who's Head of Corporate Governance at DHCW, to update us on the work that's been undertaken since our last meeting. Laura.
Diolch, Marion. So yeah, as always, a real pleasure to present our Welsh language report, and I'll just briefly highlight some key areas of focus. So in terms of the current Welsh language skills, we currently have 50.7% of staff with level 1 to 5. So I'm really pleased to have finally passed that 50% mark. Members will be aware that DHW offer free Welsh language learning through the Centre of Learning Welsh In addition, we offer one-to-one tutoring with Coleg Cambria, and we have launched an internal mentoring scheme which is helping staff to build their confidence to use Welsh. We have a new courtesy course which is due to be launched by Welsh Government, but unfortunately this won't be mandatory for completion on ESR, which which presents some challenges in terms of monitoring our completions of this course. So we are working as a team to use that content and develop a DHEW version of the courtesy course to be delivered in person with staff. And then once this is completed, staff will achieve level 1 skills. Members will be aware that we've been working with WIDI to develop a new hub iaith to share Welsh language best practice across health and social care. And we're now working collaboratively with Welsh Government to launch and promote this. So a link to that website is included in the papers. In terms of risks, I just wanted to highlight 2 areas, one being the NHS app login, the Welsh language interface. So members will be aware that in the report that NHS England have advised that this work has been delayed to the end of the summer 2025. So we have been engaging with the Welsh Language Commissioner on this. And our correspondence is linked in the report for your information. And we'll just continue to monitor risks, complaints and concerns regarding this as we wait for that work to be completed. And then the last one was specifically highlighting, it's not included in the report because of some timing, but it just relates to compliance with our operational standards, specifically around the service desk. So currently, we only have 2 fluent Welsh service desk analysts, both of whom are on fixed term funding until the end of March 2025. And due to unconfirmed funding, we are likely to lose both analysts if it's not addressed, which would mean that we won't be compliant with Welsh language standards. So we are working with the Operations Directorate to mitigate this risk, and there is a need just to ensure that there's appropriate succession planning and strategic workforce planning in this area too, especially as we prepare to formally come under the Welsh language standards at the end of this calendar year, and we'll just continue to work with operations and people and OD colleagues on this. So those were the things I just wanted to highlight today, and happy to take any questions. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Laura. A very helpful introduction and an update there on the issue around the Welsh speakers on the service desk and the risk around that, which is unfortunate, of course, but we know that the unfunded position does pose specific risks for us. And I think it's good to hear that you are working on a strategic workforce plan with our colleagues in People and OD. We've undertaken a lot of work in this area to recruit Welsh speakers to the service desk, which is our public-facing area, and it would be very disappointing indeed if we were to slip back, given that we are coming under the standards later this year. So we will be coming back to this issue at our next committee meeting and hopeful of some sort of resolution. In the meantime, I think it is an important issue that we will want to highlight to board, so that at that level we are fully sighted of this risk and hopefully able to take some mitigating action, which means that we won't fall foul of these standards when they come in later this year. It is a very important issue, so thank you for highlighting that. Ruth, you have your hand up.
Diolch, Marion. I just thinking in relation to this risk around the service desk not having Welsh speakers available. Are we able to link this to any of our other risks that we're currently presented with in terms of the traffic that might be coming towards the service desk? I'm thinking particularly around all the issues with the GP systems suppliers. I'd wonder whether, given that we're likely to have a far higher proportion of Welsh speakers out in our GP population, whether that's going to direct any additional traffic to us potentially over the coming months, that we might well need additional support in terms of the Welsh language to deal with on the service desk. So I just wonder if there is a link to any of our other risks or upcoming activity that actually will mean that it's even more important for us to secure Welsh language skills on that service desk.
Thank you, Ruth. That's a really good point to raise. I wonder, Chris, whether this is something you want to respond to? Diolch.
Yeah, I think it is a good point to raise. I think in terms of future activity as well, the potential formal public launch of the app will be another thing that brings big numbers in, and we know we've bolstered the service desk because of that. So I think it's a really valid point. I'll pick that up with colleagues in ops outside of this and just try and do a bit of future horizon scanning on that to kind of understand what the implications could be. So thank you for raising that.
Diolch, Chris, and thank you, Ruth, for raising that point. If there aren't any further questions or observations, Laura, thank you for presenting that report to us. Very helpful, and certainly as we turn to the highlight report, this issue is something clearly which needs highlighting within the report for escalation to board. Can I check, other issues to be included in the highlight report? And I'm conscious that the board meeting happens probably just in 10 days' time. It would be good to be able to present the highlight report in writing, so we'll work hard to do that. Clearly, there are the internal audit reviews, which should be highlighted, the Audit Wales annual report as well, the budget and the financial update and discussion we had today. There's also the quality and regulatory compliance report and the good work we've seen in some of our other areas in terms of decarbonisation and compliance. And lastly, the Welsh language report, as I mentioned. Can I just check with colleagues whether there are any other specific points that you would want to escalate to board within my highlight report? Claire?
Not necessarily escalate, but I think the feedback from Audit Wales, we need a little bit of fairy dust, I think, with all the other stuff that's going on. I think as a board, it's acknowledgement of the work that we're doing and the position that we've held and holding. Absolutely,
great minds think alike, Claire. That's a really key point, which we will include for sure. Thank you. We'll work on that together swiftly then, so we get it ready to be included within the board papers. I've not been notified of any other urgent business. So can I just take this opportunity to thank my colleagues for your contributions and for your insightful observations. And can I thank Audit Wales and Internal Audit as well for your contributions, which are highly valued, and to everybody who's taken part in today's committee meeting. The date of our next Audit and Assurance Committee meeting is the 8th of April of this year. Thank you all. I'll now bring this meeting to a close. That gives us 10 minutes break until we reconvene for our private session just after 12:25. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd am eich cyfraniadau ac edrych ymlaen i'ch gweld chi yn y cyfarfod nesaf. Llawer o diolch, dyfo. Thank you and goodbye.